Morning, everyone. This is our final live of 5 that we have done between Jill and I about the customer journey. And this one is really the most important one because this is where we ask you to, as Jill just put it, give us the moolah and get ready to give us your cash. So I'm joined by Jill from the Business Kitchen. Jill's got years of experience working with clients, helping them work on their business. Jill, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell you a bit about the Business Kitchen before we jump into what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Henny. Good to speak to you again. So the Business Kitchen is very much aimed at small and micro businesses, but we're all about the how-to of the foundations of your business. So we're not going to talk to you about SEO, that's Henny's bag, or websites or the marketing. We're going to be talking about who is your ideal customer. What are you charging? How are you making any money? Which seem to be what a lot of businesses miss out before they start doing their marketing, which is sort of interesting. So it's all practical, hands-on. I mean, Henry's seen a couple of our workshops. You do the work in the room. It's not just throwing information at people. It's bite-sized. It doesn't cause overwhelm because we get so much information and nobody ever does anything with it. It's just a waste, really.
It's 1,000%. And I always say, if you don't get the foundation sorted, then you just grow the problem as you grow. So the problem becomes a bigger problem.
Until it breaks. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So highly recommend the Business Kitchen and Jill, and I've seen her in action. She's absolutely amazing. So definitely get in touch with Jill. So today we're going to talk about how do we get someone to part with their cash, and what specific concerns a buyer might have about the value or the ROI of your product or service at this stage. So I'm going to pass it over to Jill with all your expertise to give us a bit of your knowledge in that head.
So at this point where we've been through all the evaluation and we've done all the social proof and all of that stuff. The reason people are going to hesitate, there's several things. One is the uncertainty about the value, as you say. We know that one of the biggest fears for people buying, particularly a business-to-business service, is, am I making the right decision? I'm going to invest this money or spend this money. Am I going to get the right return on it? The other one is, which we'll talk about in a bit, is decision fatigue. So people just run out of the will to actually buy, and this would include things like cart abandonment on e-commerce and online purchases. Where we make the process so difficult that people are just like, I can't be bothered. There's the fear of commitment. What is they're actually signing up to? Are there any hidden things? And we've all been caught by these things where we sign up for something expecting to have a particular outcome, and then we suddenly get a bill for 4 times the amount we thought we were going to get. Probably our folks, we probably haven't read the detailed small print, but it wasn't how it was presented.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is are they missing any bits of information? Is the stuff that's fundamentally missing. So, but as you say, the uncertainty about the value, hopefully, as they've gone through the process, they have, we've presented that in a way with the social proof and the benefits, but their question probably is around, will it really solve my problem? There's that whole thing around the whole skepticism, because we all have now experienced so many gurus out there offering this magic bullet that will take our revenue from £1 a day to £1 million a day in 3 days, and it's all out there, and so people are very skeptical of any promises I think that any of us make about anything that we do. So so that's one of the pieces, is how do they really understand it's real?
However, I will, and I totally agree with you, but there's a little caveat that I would say, is that I still meet clients who are still buying those products from people all of the time. And you're like, it's working. So there is a little bit of, don't forget to blow your own trumpet at this point.
It's true.
Because a lot of people forget at this point that there is something in the sensationalism that they are putting across. You only need to look at Trump winning the election this morning to know that is, the big I am. I'm going to tell everyone how amazing I am. And actually, I think at this point, for me, this is where people almost think they've done it on all the pages, they've done it on all the bits, that they forget at this point. It's the crucial bit where they actually have to back themselves and say, actually we're really good at this, and not forget that you're just about to get that click. It's sort of like, I've done everything, now let's wait for the purchase to happen.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's like with and we've talked about this through the whole journey. You know, you still have to be taking that action. You still have to be on it. You know, it's not done until the fat lady sings, and that means it's not done until somebody's committed to paying you some cash at the end of the day. So, and it's interesting where if you were to look at a leaky bucket, you know, how much of the leak is at this point as opposed to further up the funnel. And I wonder how many people actually know that stat for their business.
Hardly any.
And it's actually
I can tell that, having gone in and worked with quite a few companies now, they don't know where their leaky buckets even start or finish, so let alone get to the end. And ultimately, knowing this bit of information is absolutely key along any point of that journey that we've spoken about. Because if people, what do you fix? So you see a lot of business owners looking around going, I don't know which bit to fix at this point. It's your fault, or it's your fault. And actually, they don't actually really know until they actually know. And so it's setting up that monitoring so it's absolutely done and correct, to see where that leaky bucket is. Otherwise, they're sort of going, well, you haven't done your job properly, or you haven't done your job, or this wasn't done right, or maybe we should try 50 other different crazy marketing ideas. If you're not monitoring that sales funnel, you don't know. And I'm sure you find the same when you're working with clients. That's the bit that they really actually don't know.
And I think it varies obviously across business. I mean, there was a classic example that one of my mentors shared with me years ago, which was a company selling CDs, you know, and they had this wonderful page and all the rest of it, and it had the image and it had all the benefits and everything. There was no way of working out how to buy it. And the net result of the marketing campaign was actually 0 sales. What you had to do apparently was you had to click the image, but there was no indication on the page. You know, and it was just like, hang on a minute. You know, this is how make it easy for people. If you make the buy difficult, if you're going to make that complicated, so they've got to hunt around the page to try and find where they can get to the cart or how to empty the cart, unless it's something that they can only get from you and they absolutely need in a crisis, they're gone. You know, they're just going to shrug their shoulders and walk away and say, you know, I'll find somebody else, or I won't bother now, or whatever it might be. So we've got to make the whole process very easy. And I think if you're in the quote journey, you know, where actually you're giving, what's the follow-up process? How do you do an FAQ? How do you make sure that you head off all their objections almost before they've voiced them during the process, so that when you get to the point of offering the quote to be signed, it's already signed mentally. It's just, you're just going through the physical piece. So looking at every step in that journey and saying, right, you know, how do we're not trying to manipulate people. We're not trying to get them to buy things that aren't right for them, but we also want to allay their fears in the most positive way possible.
And it's always the fears that stop the purchase. And I think so often people don't really understand. I was giving a talk at the Growth Hub yesterday, funnily enough, and we were talking about, you know, how do you get people over the line? It's all very well creating these sort of pieces telling everyone how wonderful you are, but if you don't really understand your client, if you don't really understand what are those, I call them friction points, but what those friction points are that stop them pressing purchase or stop them, we need to know how their brain thinks in their buying decisions. So where do they start that journey? Where are they hanging out when they start that journey? And what do they need as they go along that to quantify whether it's you or not? And I think most businesses really struggle with this because they're so close to their own business, and it isn't really their fault. It's just that we're all too close to our own businesses to see them objectively and then to come out and be our client. So sometimes the best way, if you haven't got a consultant or you're not working with someone like you, Gill, or someone like me, is to go out and then ask your customer, what decision did you make when you came there? Where did you start? And what did you need from us to find out whether that's true? And then go and ask someone who isn't your customer, who you know could possibly go down this journey, and go, what would you need from us? And actually, when you hear it from the horse's mouth, it's actually it's quite interesting, and it's often not what you expect. You make presumptions about clients or future prospects.
We always say this when we do the swap with the members, is, you know, one of the things on the strength side is to ask existing clients why they buy from you. And one of our members pre-COVID did that very thing and went out, and the thing that came back from their customers was actually quality, but it wasn't something they were shouting out on their marketing because they took it for granted.
Oh, I see that all the time.
You know?
I sit with business owners and they talk about their business and themselves and they're very upbeat about it. And I'm listening to all the great things that they're doing and I'll look at their marketing. And along those sales funnels, there's literally nothing there that says any of it. And you're like, so where is that then? Where's that on your marketing material? Where's that? Oh God, do you know what? You're right. And I always say it's a bit like reading when you've written an essay and you read your spelling mistake, but as it's meant to be, you just see it. You're so close, you don't see it anymore. Actually, getting a second pair of eyes. I always say, if you can get a group of trusted friends together, not friends, business owners who have different skill sets, create those groups and sit there and go, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So that you can get that outside perspective on what it is that you're trying to achieve. And use Canva. Canva's excellent for mapping out customer journeys. You've got the whiteboard function in there. It's a free tool. You'll be amazed how that journey twists and turns as you begin to work through each branch, and you'll be like, oh, but what happens if they say no here? And what happens if they say yes? Or what happens if they don't know at this point? What can we give them? You will be amazed at how many different variants that actually has and how many you haven't covered. And most of the time,
I did a journey mapping with some people from with the Growth Hub the other couple of weeks ago now. And I gave the simpler example of, because the devil's in the detail with this stuff. And that's where people, they put it together and it's all too high level. It's not, as you say, it's not detailed enough. And I just gave the simpler example of you make a phone call. There are 4 outcomes from making a phone call. And everybody's like, really? It's like, well, they don't answer the phone. It's a duff number, which we get on events a lot. They answer, but they're too busy. Yeah. Or they answer and they're ready to talk to you. Well, in those 4 instances, exactly what is it you're going to do next?
Oh, I always say get out. I use stick-it notes when I first start rather than a whiteboard. I change it round and then just write on it. Stick it on a wall. Start to see how that journey works. And then once you've mapped, and look, Rome is not built in a day. I always go pick your most important product or service, the one that makes you the most money. Map that out. Look at those instances. What if they do? What if they don't? Again, phone calls. All of those different things. What mechanisms do you need in place? Have you proven their outcome at each of these individual stop points? Are we showcasing what they need to know at this point? Really think it through, because it's not actually that difficult. You will be amazed if you pull all your teams together, how many people will think of different variants. Like, oh, well, this happens in my department, and this is what happens in my department. And before you know it, your whole entire wall is covered with different variants of this journey. But you'll see how many each of those touch points has a leaky bucket to it. So if you tighten that up across the board, forget the end. The end is where we're hoping that they've got to each of those variants.
You start at the beginning. You just optimize every single step. When I worked in financial services in the city, we used to have the brown paper exercise, which was basically we papered the walls in one of the meeting rooms with brown paper from the post office, from the postage room, and then you say stacks of post-it notes, and then people would come in and add their bit into the map, and then you'd look at,
brilliant.
Oh, hang on, because it was actually to get out a systems requirements document, right? And so actually it's a really good way of gathering requirements, because you look at each step and say, oh, well, actually in that bit we need this to be happening, and we need these pieces of data, and we need these controls, but these maps used to be, as you say, I mean, it just looked amazing, because it was so much.
But it is amazing, actually, even as you get towards the end, as you say. So if it's like an e-commerce thing, what happens if they don't just press that purchase button? What happens at that point? And I would say, well, look, there's Embula, which will send you a live cart into your email where you can check out from the email rather than from the website. There's loads of different tools, mechanisms that you can use, but it's identifying what's needed at that moment in time, not just going, well, of course, most people think with their positive head on, and most business owners actually sit in the positive category.
Which is probably just as well, really, to be honest.
It probably is. We probably wouldn't be where we are, would we, if we hadn't? But they sort of think, well, they're going to purchase. They're not looking at, when I start digging down into the reasons why they won't purchase, they find that a very uncomfortable
I'm sure.
conversation.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the most important conversation to have. Why will someone not do it? And let's mitigate that.
Yeah.
So, and the end is just as important in that, to
Yeah.
stop them from going, oh, I can't be bothered with this, or even when they're reading a quote, I see some insanely long quotes coming out to people, which some people will want and in the detail, but actually they're generally skipping right to the end to get the price. And at that point,
Yeah.
they're not putting the highlights there,
Yeah.
the outcome. So they're missing. They go, well, we've put that all at the front, but actually they skip to the back to look for the cost. They're ignoring what you've written there. So where you put your costs has to be the place where you also show the highlights and the outcomes.
Which is also about knowing your customer, isn't it? So that, because somebody will, if you're doing a quote for a larger company, somebody in the company is going to want all the detail. But I always follow the route that we used to use for audit reports, which was, we'd write a 30 or 40 page audit report, which was full of all the controls. The executive summary was only allowed to be 1 page. That was it. You had to condense the key findings for senior management into 1 page. That was it. Yeah. So that they could read it literally in 2 minutes, right? And if you didn't capture it in the 2 minutes, it didn't get through review. So same thing with a quote. The person who's making the decision, the ultimate decision, probably wants a 1 or 2 page summary, as you say, of the benefits of any risks that are in there, because there might be risks, what the costs are, what the terms and conditions are, so that they can just look at it and say, yep, no, can we negotiate on that bit, whatever it might be. So it's knowing your audience. It's how do they want the information presented, not hang on, I'm going to write this quote, it's going to be my life story, which I have seen people do.
Yeah. and an insanely small writing as well, that you're like, I need to get out a magnifying glass for this, and I'm like, am I getting old, or is it just me? And but they are really important moments, actually, because someone has got to the end. And I think you're absolutely right. You sent me the questions today, which was fab, and you're like, how do we get past them? How do we get them re-energized? Because actually some of them have gone down a really long journey to get there.
Yeah, so one of the things on the decision fatigue is, how do we actually recognize that that's happening, right? Because I think, as you say, on an e-commerce site, whether it's decision fatigue or it's because they can't find the button or whatever it might be, there's tools that you can put in place to understand that. But if we're in a business services like you and I are, where actually it's more about conversations and ongoing in terms of, rather than just signing something, how do we identify that actually maybe they're not necessarily cooling off, but they've sort of run out of steam because it's taken so long to get. So, things like not returning emails, not returning phone calls. But again, mapping out, as you say, we get to this point in the journey, these are the possible outcomes. What happens if they don't respond to an email? What happens if they're not responding to a phone call? What's our process then, as you mentioned, for re-energizing them, re-engaging them? Maybe going back to their pain points and saying, remember that, if you don't do this, this is what's going to cost you over the next 2 years, 3 years. This is what's not going to happen because you're not taking the action that we agreed. You've got to think about exactly how that piece works, because that is part of the leaky bucket. That decision fatigue is definitely part of the leaky bucket.
I also find length of time that people leave things to be a problem, because they'll send a quote, there's no deadline, there's nothing there, like read it in your own time, and then that person goes quiet. And actually we know from statistics that the quicker you can close someone down after doing that, the more likely they are to actually go with you over someone else. So putting some sort of time frame within the quote to say valid for.
I must have told you the story of the wealthy taxi driver. Why are some taxi drivers wealthy?
No, I don't think you have.
Because they always book the return journey. And basically, when you're sending a quote or a proposal, even if you're sending somebody information that they've requested, how are you booking that return journey? So if I send you a quote, when I agree I'm sending you the quote, and hopefully that's a telephone conversation rather than all over email, it's right, Henny, I'm going to send you the quote today. Why don't we book a time in the diary next week at 10 o'clock on Tuesday so I can answer any questions? We're not necessarily saying so you can sign it. We don't want to necessarily put that amount of pressure, but we book that time in to say, we're almost giving them a deadline and saying, that gives you a week or however long we think. But actually what I'm saying is 10 o'clock next Tuesday, we're going to have a conversation. I'll answer any questions. We can iron out any problems that we might have so that we can get going with this project or whatever. So you're leaving it very much as though they have said yes without forcing them to say yes.
Yeah,
if you put that in the diary, and then on the Tuesday, if you sent information, then actually when you phone them on the Tuesday, you would basically be saying, I don't suppose you've had time to read it yet, because information people are very busy with. Yeah. Because what you want is a no answer that isn't really a no. But if you say, have you read it? Oh, have you read it yet? And you say no, where do you take the conversation from there? You're stuck, right? So, but this is the detail. This is, okay, we're going to make that phone call. This is exactly what we're going to say. This is what they might say. Then
and it allows you to control the outcome. I think the other thing is that when people are on that wavering edge, some people are parting with a lot of money at this point. It isn't a small decision for people to make. And so at that point, you really need to listen and hear them out in terms of, let me understand that a little bit more for you. So that they feel heard and feel like they are having some sort of agency over the outcomes that they're getting. They also need to know that you're going to hear them out the whole way across the process. So it's really important at this stage to dig down into their nose even further, because sometimes you think you've covered it, and actually there is that private conversation that's still going on in their head, the one that I always talk about, which would be like, if it's a no, don't run away from that no. Dig right down into that no, because at that point you can try and turn it into a yes. If you take the time to understand it, just go, look, I understand this is a no. I'd be really interested to find out why it is, because we need to obviously improve our processes here, and we want to learn from this experience amongst any others. So is it, and if it's me, then that's cool. I've got big shoulders. It's good to hear this feedback because it's actually helpful. And I found that when I've done that with people, there's some things that you don't want to hear, of course, but those are the reasons why you're losing it. So those are the real reasons why what you have to address.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, you're absolutely right with that drilling on the no, is because sometimes it will be a no. Yeah. And they may have, and it may be simply that they've looked at, they agree with the investment, they can see the pain, etc., etc., etc. But something has happened in the business. It's just like, we just simply can't do this. We know it doesn't work. But sometimes it isn't actually a no, it's a no later. And if it's a no but later, then you need to have that return journey booked in again. You say, well, when you're saying later, we're talking later this year, a couple of years' time. Well, why don't I, if it's later this year, well, not this year, obviously next year. How about I come and see you in June? Just to catch up, see how everything's going, so you're continually putting those touch points in, that you're not hassling people. You're not saying, well, later, well, I'll give you a ring next week. If somebody says later, they probably don't mean next week, right?
I find the more casual you get at this point about it, the easier it is to keep that relationship open. So, I always say use words like no worries, which I know people go, but it's really known to put people at ease, to feel that you're approachable. Say, look, I really happily talk to you at any point. If there's any issues, just let me know, because hopefully it will allow me to build some trust in us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So please feel free to call at any point. No, there's no hard feelings that we didn't win this contract. Obviously we're upset we didn't, but we get it. And keeping things open, because you'll be amazed at how quickly people come back again if you take that approach.
Well, and also when they've actually made the wrong choice, and the person that they chose doesn't deliver.
Which happens.
You're sort of waiting in the rain. I mean, it's that front of mind stuff, isn't it? So if it is truly later, and something you can sort of judge whether they're really saying no or not. But it is that case of the thing that my mentor always says, Peter always says, is what we're trying to do is we want to get to a position where we are allowing people to buy. We are not selling to them. And so that backing off and being supportive, and as you say, no worries, keep in touch. If I see any information that's relevant to you, is it okay if I send you an email? So you're continually adding value to them still isn't selling to people. It is allowing them to buy. And there's actually a very different mindset when you look at that. We've all been sold to, and we all know how much we don't like it.
Yeah, and actually, no one likes it. And I think that is the case. I mean, I always say, if you wouldn't walk into a room and approach your friend going buy, buy, buy. So why do you do
Well,
that to
of course, some people at networking do, which is always very interesting.
most? I would say most do. But that is not how you actually get the sales. So you go, how many sales do you make? It's the ones when they do make them through networking that have been regularly, that have built friendships, who have actually turned up
Yeah.
and done their bit and really shown their value time and time and time again. That's how they do it. The rest who are coming to turn up for one session on a one-off, who think that they're just going to suddenly get loads of business and are like, here, take my card, take my brochures, take
What
everything.
we call the
And
hunters.
you're like, wow.
And also they probably get quite a lot of buyer's remorse, which is of course why for a lot of sales for consumer products, you get a 14-day cooling off period, which is actually basically to allow for buyer's remorse, because you have been sold to, and then you've woken up next morning and think, oh my God, what have I done?
That's why being an e-commerce company is tough. One of the things on e-commerce companies towards the end, which we didn't cover, so I covered like the cart being in the email, which is a really great way of, because what you don't want them to do is click through and then go through that whole process again. If you can do it within the email, then you can just check straight out at that point. It takes you straight through to the checkout bit, rather than having to fill in all those details again. So it's like the cart, but it's sitting within the email thing. So it allows you to just refill that in. But another thing is that one of the main reasons why people leave at this point is they're presented with unexpected costs. So the postage is wrong. The something else, their returns policy isn't right. So you need to make sure that on a checkout page, you have reviews, you have a clear returns policy. They already know your postage before they even get there, so that you are not losing them at that point in time, because that's why most people at that point, when they get to the end, have disappeared on you.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there was something, I can't remember what it was, I bought on Amazon a few months ago, and it wasn't Amazon selling it, it was one of their other sellers, and it wasn't the price was too good. It was like, oh, okay, that's quite a reasonable price. £15 postage. £15 postage. It's like, no.
And you see that a lot. You see that a lot, because they hook you in with a tiny price, thinking that you've done your research, and then you get to the end and it's like £15, and you're like, I'm out of here. Then I'll go back to the one that was more expensive.
Yeah.
We're not idiots. So actually, as a consumer, we got to treat our consumers like they're not, because they're not. Consumers are very savvy nowadays, and so we need to be. The other thing for e-commerce is that you've got your coupon codes and honey codes and things like that. A lot of people will use those on the live sites to see if there's any discount code there, and they'll often leave now at that point if there's no code at all.
Oh, really?
So actually making sure that you've submitted, even if it's like £2 off postage or something in those coupon code places, is also quite key, because they'll go around and try 4 or 5 different sites, and at that checkout they'll whiz those like Chrome extensions to see if they can get a bit more money off. So that's another little thing to look out for on the e-commerce side of things.
Okay. So then the final bit of this really is the people thinking, well, I don't need to do it today, I can leave it till later, and how we actually, obviously on if they're buying online, then there's limited offers and things. I guess if it's a quote or a proposal, then how do we get that sense of urgency into them making a decision? I suppose some of that is around our limited availability. Of course, it has to be true. You can't fib and say you're busy.
No, but there is, with any company, there's only so many people you can actually work with at any one time. So that actually does create a scarcity within what you do, and to use those bits of scarcity that are true is absolutely key.
I mean, the other one you can obviously use in there, which it would have to sit with you, I'm not sure it sits with me very well, is obviously a threatened price rise. So it is a bit of you get it at this price today, but we're actually putting our prices up on the 1st of June, and therefore not sure how much more it might cost you, but your investment will go up, and therefore it will affect the returns. I suppose the other thing is the part of the urgency piece is we need to look at our process earlier for how we were getting them to engage with their pains, because it may be that what we haven't done as part of that earlier part of the funnel is made the pains actually urgent. Because if the pains aren't urgent, then they're not going to take urgent action. If it's just an issue that's sort of bubbling around in the background, it's been bubbling around for 2 years, it probably has cost the business money, but they're not really seeing the cost. It becomes quite sort of like, well,
I would try and show them that cost, to show them over a long period of time how long that is, what that actually costs them.
Well, the classic is with a sale, if you're working with a sales team, or sales team manager, is to ask them how much, a lack of conversions has cost them over the last 2 years, and then say, well, if that continues for another 2 years, that's going to cost you, £500,000, and you'll be glad to hear my training doesn't cost you £500,000. It's one of those sorts of The other one that's interesting actually around the urgency as well, and also slightly the trust thing, is, and this really applies to small businesses like ours, is sometimes people will say, well, I've looked at it all and it's all fine, but actually I can get this elsewhere, to which our answer has to be, but you can't get to me elsewhere. It's what you were saying about blowing our own trumpets. The experience with each of us is very different, because we're different people, and that's actually quite a key.
Different life experiences, in terms of how we got to our business, and that's absolutely right. It is to blow our own trumpet at that bit. I think that's so often the thing that I see is not there with companies, is they're not, they know it internally. They know how hard they try for the businesses they work for. They know all of that, but they forget to communicate it.
Absolutely. I think the other place I just think about on the delay stuff as well, which we haven't addressed specifically over the last couple of sessions, but we've talked about knowing your customer. But one of the things you also need to know is you need to understand their internal buying process, so that if you submit a quote and you're thinking, oh well, we'll get an answer, if that then has to go through a whole load of procurement people, you need to know how long that's likely to take. What other information do they need alongside the quote? So you're heading off the objections and glitches in their process.
Yeah.
But you've got to have found that out through the gathering. You've got to find out, well, okay, Henny, if I send you a quote, how does that then get processed internally? How does that decision get made?
So it's a really good point, actually. And not one I had thought of, so that's a good one to because I generally deal with much smaller companies, so it's but it's absolutely dead right. To make sure you've covered all bases of what they actually need, that you're not being dismissed at that point just because of those
and be aware of things like, are they going to do credit checks? D&B checks and Dun & Bradstreet checks and things. Especially if you're a limited company, you will have a record. You need to know that, because you need to know if there might be any unintended consequences in there you're not aware of. So that it is that whole knowing your customer. It's not just about knowing their pains and their gains, but understanding their process, understanding who's involved. You might be talking to the decision maker, but are they actually the process owner? Because if they're a larger company, they'll have a separate procurement company or accounts payable or whatever it might be. So knowing that, you can then look at their timetable as well. And thinking about, have they got a funding cycle, for example, which means if you're at the end of the month, they won't make a decision until the next month, because it's money and things.
And not bugging them in the interim period when you know that they won't be ready.
Well, they won't be ready, precisely. Because that means you haven't listened. That's demonstrating a lack of understanding of their business, which might come back on you. So it all comes down to understanding the customer, I think, at the end of the day, doesn't it, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the crux, really. I mean, in every single part of this stage that we've spoken about, it's understand your customer, understand your customer, understand your customer. And I would say that even when I sit in a room filled with most businesses at any time that I'm doing a talk or doing something like this, I put the hands up and goes, how many people have spoken to their customer? And everyone put their hand up. And I went, but how many people have asked them these types of questions? 0 people have their hand up. And you're like, so if you go away today, these are the sort of conversations you need to be having with your customer, and really not try and sell to them. You'll sell to them by default, because this is probably the first time that a customer's had someone call them who is genuinely interested in what they want from them. So
Yeah.
they're going to be really pleased that you've actually taken that time out to find out
Yeah.
about it. And I think in all of our talks, that's got to be the one thing that I hope people go away with, isn't sort of the tricks and tips that you can use on each stage of these funnels and what you can do. It's actually really digging down into what does your customer really want, what decision making process do they need to go on, and how do we give that to them in the way that's the easiest way for them to consume it as possible, so that you are taking away those friction points along each
Absolutely.
step.
Yeah.
And map it out, get some stick-it notes, shove it on a wall, start to think about all the different variants that they could take, get your team involved, and then bring in maybe some clients and say, look, these are all the potential decisions. What would you need at each step of this?
Yeah.
I'd just like to really understand how I can make this process easier for you. I know, take them out for lunch, do something, but it helps. That's
It's
gold.
interesting. It's how, it's how big business still works. And people are, I think small businesses are sometimes reluctant to learn from big, they see them as these big corporate giants and everything. But a lot of what they do for very good reasons, and because they've spent a lot of money working out that that's the best thing to do, right?
I always say, why are you copying the small guys? Why are you not copying the big guys? They've got teams of marketers out there.
And they've
And they're like,
tested
well, I'll never be like that. And I go, yeah, but you take 1% of their market share, you are on thousands. Don't copy the worst, copy the best, because your perfect client's spending money with them right now. So
and the bigger guys will have tested and tested and tested and tested and tested.
they will. But the great thing about the big guys is they're slower. They're
Yes.
slower at making decisions. They're not as personalized in their approach. That gives you a competitive advantage
Absolutely.
over them. So if you start copying what they do that's really, really good, buy from them. I call that funnel hacking. But if they've got an e-commerce store, buy from them. Speak to people who have purchased their service. Find out what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. You can learn so much that's out there for you to learn from. Ring up their reception, ask their prices, know what they're up to. If you don't, you're missing out on some amazing information throughout all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that most people don't. They sort of, if you say what are your competitors' prices, some will really know, and that's great, so that they know where they sit roughly. But it's not about price. It's all about their processes, how they deal with their customers, what they're doing wrong. Then you can approach their customers and go, we know that you're not getting this, that you're probably with them and this is where they're failing, but this is what we do better. And you can make people switch just by knowing what their faults are.
No, it's true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think everything we've talked about on the 5, it comes back to, you gotta do the work. Basically. I mean, I was running this workshop yesterday on reset, regroup, and restart yesterday, and one of the things I said to the guys is, you've got to do the work. You've got to do the prep. You've got to do the research. You've got to do the really thinking about how the process works, who the customer is, how you're pricing, how you're offering. You can't, if you just start with the marketing before you've even done all the foundations, it's throwing mud at a wall, and some of it might stick. But it won't be consistent. It won't be reliable. And it sure as hell won't be scalable.
Yeah. It's it's absolutely fascinating. Gill, thank you so much for joining me for this final session. It's been great having you to do it. I know, I'm sure we'll come up with others at some point. Anyone who wants to get in touch with Gill, I'm putting her QR code up here. Please feel free to scan it. And get in touch with the Business Kitchen. They're absolutely brilliant at everything that they do. And thanks for joining me.